How is that? All right?
Hi, everyone. Welcome, Dr. Ahmed. Yes, perfect. We can see you at the webinar. The voice is perfect. Our attendees and listeners, I'm happy to introduce the keynote number 2, Dr. Ahmed Al-Shahi from Oxford University. His presentation title is on educational cross-currents, recent perspective. Dr. Ahmed Al-Shahi is a social anthropologist and research fellow at St. Anthony's College at Oxford University and the co-founder of the Sudanese program with Bona Malawal, a Sudanese journalist. He taught social anthropology at the universities of Khartoum, Newcastle upon Tyne, and Oxford. He undertook anthropological fieldwork on the Shaigia, correct me if I'm wrong, Shaigia tribe of North Sudan, and particularly on the large community in the city of Nuri. The themes of his fieldwork research are agricultural and economic development, sectarian politics, social differentiation, social and kinship institutions, and oral literature, stories, poetry, saying, and songs among both the secondary and nomadic populations of the area. He is a fellow of the Royal Anthropological Institute of Great Britain and Ireland, and a member of the Association of Social Anthropologists and the Kingdom, and at the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth. Some of his latest publications include Wisdom from Nile in Arabic and Wisdom from the Desert in Arabic, also in collaboration with FCT Mori. Dr. Ahmed, I will leave you now to give your presentation. Then you will be happy to state the story behind this paper based on your previous one, please.
Thank you very much, Ahoud, Dr. Ahoud, and I'm very grateful for the invitation, as well as I thank Max for his excellent administrative procedure and concern, and also Janan. And I'm very grateful to be given the opportunity to talk about my own experiences. Now, the base of this talk really took place about 40 years ago. I gave a paper on the educational system in the Middle Eastern countries at a British Society for Middle Eastern Studies conference at the Royal Holloway College, University of London in 1980, I think. The discussion was frank and factual, and the underlying theme of that paper was, why do students from Arab Muslim countries face difficulties when studying in Western educational institutions? Now, that paper created a lot of stir. There were two camps. The Arabs were at that conference, were telling me why should I point out the deficiency of the educational system. The Europeans were delighted, and consequently, the paper was circulated in British universities to be given not only to students from the Middle East and Muslim countries, but also to staff members in order to alert them to the problem students face when they come to study in British universities. But as a starting point, I think is very relevant to this, is to quote from a headmistress in the Gulf. And really, she puts her finger on the problem, which I will be elaborating on. She says, why did I go into, this is a quote, why did I go into education? Because I would like to see changes in our educational system. I would like to make a thorough study of the syllabuses and curricula we have and possibly improve them. At the moment, they are very packed. They are not always up to date. What we learn at preparatory and secondary school is not necessarily the most recent knowledge available. We should be keeping abreast of modern discoveries and educational techniques. When we were at school, the teacher, and that's really crucial, the teacher would tell us to shut up. What have we done wrong? That if a student asks a question, he or she, the same person recommends a radical but meaningful recommendations. And one admires her for saying so. She said, if we are going to change, we have to change the syllabuses, the teaching methods, the type of teachers we employ. We will need new teachers who are able to use more advanced methods. The whole ministry will have to involve itself in these changes. One individual cannot just act by himself or herself. And then she made a comparison between men and women. She said, men in the desert all think that they are strong. Each one considers himself a king. Yet in Bedouin life, the woman does all the work, while the man sits and drinks coffee. She herds the sheep, she brings in the milk, she looks after the children, she even puts up the tent, which is hard work. They, the men, do not mind her doing physical labor, but they do not like her to think. They felt it diminishes them. If women think too, what is left for them? And hence, this is really the problem. And my intention here is to elaborate on what she said, these common patterns in the educational system. Of course, there are exceptions to these patterns, particularly with reference to those people who were, say, brought up in Western circumstances and either being born there or educated in Western European countries, the United States, Australia, or anywhere else in Europe. And it graduated from Western institution. Now, Western education based in the Middle East, like now mushrooming branches of American universities in the Gulf, as well as the traditional two American universities, one in Beirut, one in Cairo. And in doing so, a distinction has to be made between literacy and education. And I am really interested in education, that's to say, pursuing knowledge in the humanities and the problem people face in pursuing this knowledge in humanity. I'm not talking about sciences, that's outside my own competence. Now, what the humanities, teaching humanities in the Middle East is really like lacking a dynamic intellectual content to further and refine knowledge. This is based on rote learning, which is the most obstacle in the educational system. That's to say, talqeen, indoctrination, repetition, and there is no room for independent thinking. Is what you receive, you have to believe and to repeat. Thus, it is quantity versus quality. I remember, talking to Middle Eastern students in a British universities. He didn't do very well in his examination, and he said to me, "Oh, but I read about 6 pages on one answer." So, what he measured in terms of length, the quantity, rather than I said, you may have written 6 pages, but there are some people from your country or others who wrote 2 or 3 pages and they pass very well. So it depends on content of what you put on paper in examination. And gradation in Middle Eastern, as Ahoud knows and you know, gradation of examination in Middle Eastern countries, whether it is secondary school, primary, secondary, or even universities, depends on memorization of data, information, rather than an interpretation or expressing personal opinion. And hence the head teacher said they have to shut up if they say anything which may contradict the teacher's teaching or opinion. And this is a kind, as I said, of indoctrination or inculcation of the mind through prescribed and managed knowledge. Managed knowledge that there are prescribed texts You don't read outside. You have to read these texts in order to pass examination. There is no critical assessment either by the teacher or students. And I think this reminds one of the impositions, say, for example, of the communist system in Russia and Eastern Europe before the collapse of Russia, where the Marxist theory is the pattern. You mustn't look at any other system, Western European system, outside the Marxist system. Unfortunately, medieval times, Arabs and Muslim scholars have done extremely well in sciences and humanities. They have written, very well and regarded books and treatises, which the West began to translate into English and is still in the field of science, of medicine. But the Arabs and Muslim scholars got stuck since then, while the West pursued further knowledge and took Arab contribution further with their critical thinking. Arab knowledge became a sacred or sacrosanct, and not to be questioned or altered at all. And this leads the difference between open mind and a closed mind. What is the root of this distinction between closed and open mind? One is respect. And the respect starts from the family. Whatever the father, your uncle, your grandfather, your grandmother say, this has to be respected. You do not say retort, or you do not question their ideas or what they say to you. And I think that is translated not only from the family to the school, to the university, that you sit and listen and you write. And even sometimes this teacher or lecturer, as I experience, you say, write, active, rather than saying, well, you listen and you write what you think, but it's what the teacher thinks you to write. So respect is, in a way, it's a very good quality in life. But when you come to knowledge, yes, indeed, you respect knowledge of the others, but also you have an opinion about what the others write. And I think that is the basis of the development in the Western educational system, that you develop, you read, you make comment. And the second issue related between this distinction is fear. You fear your elders, you fear your teachers in case they fail you in examination. If you retort to them, if you reply to them, if you add from your own personal views about what they teach and what they do. And thus, the conformity to the traditional social hierarchy, be it at the family level or at the school level, and ultimately to the providers of education, teachers, political authority, religious authority, is absolutely vital into the educational system of the Middle East and Muslim country. This brings me to where I started, the problem facing students from the Middle East studies in Western educational institution, as I have experience in teaching them, in supervising them, and looking at their thesis. The first I encounter is ability to be critical of sources. That you say, review of literature. Yes, you review, you said, X said this, Y said this, and so forth, so on. And you tell the student, he or she, but what do you think of what X and Y said? Do you have an opinion on this? And he or she will say, no, I think you could tell me what, how I do it, how I be critical of them. It's not their fault. They are intelligent, but they have not been taught back at home to be critical. And this lack of ability of critical sources, it takes them a long time to overcome it when they come to Western educational institutions. The second, and I'm here really, I am condensing quite a lot of information, is the ability to think independently, not only of the teacher, but also of the book you read, the sources. I mean, my impression is sort of in, Middle Eastern universities, I have seen to say, well, hardly students go to, they have libraries and sit and read, because they always remember, sort of depend on muqarrarat, whether these are books or cyclosat, lectures, the teachers give them to read and to come and recogitate them at examination. And the more you recogitate, the better marks. So there is no independent thinking to develop the mind and intellectual ability for innovation, to innovate into the knowledge. And thirdly, and very importantly, I encounter is lack of methodology of research. Many students I encountered in United Kingdom, for example, you say, one student I remember say, I want to do research on ظاهرة الطلاق في المجتمع العربي, the phenomenon of divorce in Arab countries. And I said to him, yes, what is specific about it? Divorce is universal in all countries of the world. It happens. He said, what is specific that you want to write upon? Oh, well, then he began to stumble on this because he hasn't really thought about it. Is it really worth doing it? And if it's worth doing it, what the statistic they have, what kind of interviews he has conducted, what kind of observation he could make. So it is mainly telling you what he or she wants to do without really making any methodology of research to pursue that line of research, whether it needs statistical information or simply description of the problem. And fourthly, and more importantly, and as I discover or as I experience, is high dependency and supervisor rather than on themselves. Everything say, you think for me, you tell me what I do. I've recently, even in Oxford, I've been sort of really supervising it, like some thesis, and the student produced really excellent two part of his thesis, but they need linkage. And I wrote back to him saying, yes, you've done very well on these two sections, but where is the link? He wrote back saying, but can you think of a link to me? Can you think of a link to me? Well, that's exactly where the student should put himself or herself into the picture. It is up to them to make the link, and that is their contribution to what they were doing in terms of research. Now, how to improve this kind of educational system for a future, because the title of your conference or your meeting is that rethinking educational reform. And this is in the spirit of that. This is only from my own experience, and I say, well, the first issue is really restructuring the educational system from the lower tiers up to university level. This has to be rethought, as indeed the headmistress saying, this is all very static. We need a dynamic system, a moving system, not only to cope, with the pressure of life, but also to say yes to the West, not just comparing yourself to the West, but to internationally, we are doing very well. We are improving our educational system. And second, and that's the most difficult really issues to implement, and I'm sure Dr. Ahoud will agree with me, to have an open system of education in order to open the mind for possible improvement. That is very difficult to achieve. For the simple reason, people link educational learning with politics, whatever system of politics exists in a particular country. And, in the West, there is a separation between education and politics. You have political views about the system, but when you come to education, you are dealing with a system of learning of contributing and of your research, you know, but there it's very difficult to, you know, our thinking here is different, you know, from, say, separated from even my colleagues from the church, I mean, from the mosque or from the synagogue. That's different, religious field, but education is different. But in the Middle East, there is this mix, the overlap, and this overlap sometimes, well, I cannot say this because religion prevent me from saying this, or because the political authority is monitoring what I say, what I write. So this is the open mind is fundamental to improving educational performance and to encourage the student to think for themselves. And lastly, in this suggestion is assessment of teaching. It is highly desirable, but in the Middle East, it's very difficult. I remember advising a department in a Middle Eastern university, remain nameless. I did ask the head of department, I said, you know, do you assess the teaching methodology and content of your staff member? He looked at me and he said, no. He was very honest. He said, no. I said, why? He said, well, if I do that, there will be a kind of revolt within the department. And people go to their respective embassy complaining that we are not treating them very well. And I said, well, can you do it the other way? Is that any promotion should be based on intellectual input or output, that on papers, on books, on research done. And he said, this again is difficult because there is no money for research. I said, you know, sometimes you write a paper without doing any research. You read books and you write on a theme from out of these books, and they could publish, but you have to, otherwise what you get staff members who are giving exactly the same lectures year in, year out, no improvement, no publication, no research, and therefore the reputation of the department remains very static. And to me, that however value they may give indeed to the students, is it really waste of money? You know, you spend so much money, but you need some return from it, and return of them, it should be a dynamic one to improve not only students' mind, but also the country itself in the future. Now, in the Middle East, as I have discovered from my own experience, the attitude that you achieve an MA, you go outside the country, whether East or West, you achieve a PhD or DPhil. It's very excellent. You do a lot of research, you learn methodology, you got some ideas. And this, unfortunately, to us, this is a beginning of further learning. Once you do research, like Ahoud, she done some research on education, she published a book, excellent. And I hope she will go on further doing that. But in the Middle East, as I have said, that's it, that's the end. You achieve the ultimate, so to speak, in achievement, and you do on very much. I'm not saying every single one of them, but majority of them, there are exceptions, of course, but majority of them is, that's it, you don't do anything. You just simply close the books and you have a series of lectures and you give these lectures again and again and again, become very repetitive and very jaded in the long run. And there are some, if I remember, I come across some saying, one of them is said, he gains his degree and then he goes to sleep. يأخذ الشهادة وبعد ذاك ينوم. That means he does do nothing. He just simply, that's it. And also, I remember one student, when Sudanese came home And he looked around, and I got, you see it in front of you, all these pictures. And he said, where are your degrees? So I said, only that my degrees, if I put them on the wall, then you believe that I have these degrees? He said, but we do it at home. I said, no, there is no need to have your degrees. It's barwizha, put it in a frame and put it on the wall. No, you could talk about it, but no. But he said, this is what we do in order to identify ourselves that we got these degrees from America, from wherever it may be. Now, and also there is another proverb, and they said, Al-Qalam ma biyazul al-balam, means however much you learn, it doesn't really wipe out, sort of stupidity of people. People with PhD, not necessarily they have reached the ultimate, no. And this is said in a critique of the educated people. I come to a point which is connected with all this system of education, is lack of research, lack of publication, no incentive by the state or universities to say, allocate funds for research. I mean, here in Western education, each faculty, each department, have funds for research and also for a travel. If you want to give a paper in Moscow or in Beijing or in Seattle, there is a money for you to apply in your department if you are entitled, and you go on your paper. It's good for the staff, good for the other recipient, and good for the university. So you can see this linkage of importance and value for the education system. It's not done in Western education. My own experience here, or even when I was in Newcastle, every 5 years, we have an assessment. An assessment, that's nothing to be, it's not done in the Middle East, and correct me if I'm wrong. I used to send forms to students and saying, could you please fill in these forms about my courses I give, and don't give them back to me, give them to the head of department. That was the rule. And the head of department read them and assess them, and he write to me saying, the student said this, the student says this. How do I learn? In a sense, there is a dialogue between me and the student. And even in Oxford, every 5 years, the Oriental faculty they will ask you, it says, Dr. Ahoud, could you please tell us how much have you done during the last 5 years in terms of research and publication? This output in publication in the English language, in the field of humanities, is not well represented among Arab educated people. It is beginning to make an impact, certainly. Cambridge University Press, Oxford University Press, Americans, Australian, or even back at home in Beirut or Cairo, there is beginning, but it's not, say, to people talk about it, saying, yeah, yes, indeed, there is a lot of publication. It's very useful publication. We are recommending this book in our teaching. So free knowledge is good, but free knowledge, is sometimes a challenge to the educational system back at home and to the political authority. And that is where the conflict lies, saying you leave the individual to think for himself or herself, and it's good. Yeah. So just not to wind up, but to reflect on what I have said so far. And a student coming to the West, what the characteristic of such student? First, they come with no topic, or if they do come with a topic, but it's not well researched to say, yes, indeed. Secondly, they want the supervisor to think for them all the time. And unfortunately, and it has come to our knowledge, I'm not saying certainly these are exceptions, not only among Arab students, but also among British students, is plagiarism. It's coming that you look at other theses, you take it from it and copy it and then bring it to the supervisor as it is yours. I have come across such case which was dealt with by the university professionally and fairly, that the student was warned that it is luckily for him that it was not the final submission of his thesis, but he has to rethink again. So, it's an easy way out. And I think that's basically that they are not trained back at home to think for themselves, to do the research themselves. It's all dependency on the on the supervisor. And thirdly, so plagiarism, fourthly, is that you got some people writing theses for them. It's becoming, even in England, sadly. And even in institution now, in the West, giving degrees, just like that, certificate or degrees, without the student attending lectures or doing his research. It's a very sad story. And these come out in the public, sometimes newspaper, and the government does act very quickly into that. So unfortunately, this is not. So you go back home and you said, oh yeah, I got a degree, in such and such, or I got a certificate, and factually there is no base for it. And those people like that are extremely dangerous to the educational system, because they enter the system without having a proper training, without proper research, without proper understanding. So rethinking reform in the educational system, as your conference admirably is trying to tackle, is in the spirit of modernity. What does it mean, modernity in the education system? To me, I think it requires cooperation to achieve a bold reform, which are much needed for the development of individual capabilities, the region and the state. That is really fundamental, that education, or people educated like Ahoud, rethink of the system. I'm not saying you just do it in one go. This requires a gradual, because the system has been going on for decades, if not centuries. This rote learning and recogitating information again and again. And the staff are not doing, this has been going on for some time, but it requires a gradual introduction of fundamental change in order that people beginning to feel they are individuals, they got a mind of their own, rather than the teacher he or she will make their mind. In this respect, as in myself, as I have known that a dialogue with Western educational institutions is beneficial in improving the equality of education in the Middle East and in Muslim countries, as well as beneficial to Western countries, that we need, this dialogue happening for improving education system, as well as for doing research, exchange of staff, for example, between the West and Western and Middle Eastern countries. That is really very important for the future. I'm not sure whether I have exhausted my time. Ahoud, tell me. Yes?
We can move on to questions, Dr. Ahmed.
Yes, I could. Now I finished that. So the modernity and dialogue, this is the last point I want to say. So if you have any question, let me know. Yeah, I am here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ahmed, for your presentation. I know you have touched very sensitive tasks in our education system.
I can't hear you properly.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you very much. Yes.
So I know that you have touched very sensitive tasks in our education system. Yes. I know some might be true until now, and we are suffering from the rote learning and dependency on teachers and lecturers to give and just transferring information. But I would like to start with a comment by Kay Gallinger. I think it's worth noting here that based on her experience, she said things have changed dramatically, at least here in the UAE, the internationalization of higher education and the influence of local and international accreditation and international rankings together dictate that higher education faculty nowadays are held accountable for their teaching, research, and service. So commenting or replying to her comment, sure, internationalization happened in the region generally, but unfortunately, these kind of things that Dr. Ahmed you've just pointed are still existed with different, especially with the students that you're facing and we are facing in higher education and their dependency on rote learning and how they expect to get the knowledge from us ready without critical thinking or criticizing or anything. But regarding the point of evaluation of staff, we do have evaluation systems for academic staff members, but the quality and effectiveness of that and the process of it differ among higher education institutions. This is another issue that someone needs to look at it deeply. There is a question. Do you want to comment, Dr. Ahmed, on
absolutely. Your comment is fine. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you for the question. I absolutely agree. I did say at the beginning, there are exceptions, particularly those people who are in American university branches in the Gulf. Yes, they're different product, different way of thinking, different methodology, absolutely. But as you said, I'm talking about the traditional universities where the system remained very static. And I think that is where the reform need, because really there are a lot of potentialities among the students, both men and women. And those people are really enormous help for the future. And those people ought to be brought up to a standard where, yes, they are contributing, to their own, country as well as to the education system. So I'm talking about that rather than graduate from, Georgetown University or Columbia or branches here and there. I'm not talking about those, not at all. That's
why I needed you to clarify, especially based on that comment. We have a question from Wahid, Dr. Wahid Hamad. He's saying that I think our main problem in the Middle East is the way we assess learning through exams and focusing on lower levels of the Bloom taxonomy, which reflects on the quality of our graduates. How can we transform our educational systems to be more accountable while moving away from the system of examination?
Yes, for example, Western countries introduced a system about 20 years ago called Modular System. Instead of examination, annual modular system. You sit for a module and the module will say you have to write 3 essays. You listen to lectures, you are given a list of books to read, and then you go and write an essay or 3 essays and come back and submit them. And that is the assessment based on the essay. And if I remember, I was part of this system. The discussion is good. It will teach a student methodology, it teaches them to read, to go to the libraries. It teaches students to have a dialogue with these books, rather than you sit with the psychological pressure on students, sitting in examination hall with other hundreds of people sitting, and you are giving 3 hours to answer these questions. So there is less pressure and more relaxed atmosphere produce a better result. This is what the idea behind modular system, to break down the system of education. So in that sense, yes, perhaps people in the Middle East, I'm not sure that this examination is the final, is the ultimate. I think I am much more amenable to say either you have a mixture of examination, or it's like, for example, the American system. You do a PhD, partly is in paper and partly in research, where in British universities, still, you write a thesis. There are no papers attached to it. But the last 10 years, I remember, is that students are advised and staff are putting, for example, courses with a specialist input from statistician, from librarian, how to help students doing research to pursue knowledge if they are doing, some statistical analysis or some library work or some archival material. So this is very useful for the student to train them to pursue their research and to achieve their goal. Yeah.
I can add, Dr. Ahmed, to your response to that question. Speaking up by on behalf of colleagues and faculty members. I'm sure in many faculties in the region that we are pressured with the number of students that we cannot proceed with some process of modular learning that you've just spoke about. There is another question by Haifa Jafar. The problem of rote learning and the quality of education and higher education in the Middle East looks like an internal one. Many studies and reports have pinpointed this issue. Many new studies and conferences keep reiterating the same problems and recommending various solutions. Is it unsolvable problem? Do you think we need to change the dialogue by focusing more on the individual success stories and innovative practices in the Middle East?
Yeah, thank you very much indeed for that question. All the question really very important. There is difference between sciences and humanities. Sciences you have to learn by rote. Your times table, 2 by 2 is 4, and so forth, so on. And you repeat this, you learn, he or she learn it from early age, or the chemical periodical sort of chart, or some hard sciences. That is absolutely essential to learn by heart, certainly. But when you come to humanities, in a sense, it's an open knowledge. It's like Bahar, a sea of knowledge. And this is up to you what you make of this enormous knowledge. And here, rote doesn't fit into that. Facts are not only variable, but are liable to be questioned. And I think that is variable. Of course, there are facts, as I said, 2 + 2 = 4. Nobody could dispute that. But, if you say Ibn Khaldun said this, or Dewey said this, or Malinowski said this, well, you say, well, I got to improve on this. I may have to question him or her on what they said. So this dialogue is very, for example, I remember, I'm sure you remember, Ahoud, you sit with us in St. Anthony's at lunchtime.
Yeah, sure.
And this never happened, that staff and students sit together and talk to each other.
Yeah, it's rare, especially.
Right. And that's very important in a sense. There is egalitarianism, and I learn from students and they learn from me. So it is a two-way process to learn from each other. I sometimes been drawn the attention to some books I haven't read or an articles I haven't read. And that's wonderful. Recently, during the lockdown, I assessed 3 papers for publication, and I was very glad to read them by students who are actually publishing them as St. Anthony's reviews. I said, well, that is really excellent. I'm very glad I read these because I learned something from them. That is, if you translate that in traditional, goodness, no, you don't write this. No, what is this? No. In a sense, only the teacher could write. And unfortunately, even the teacher themselves do not write. So,
yeah, but thank God that this time or this age is done, because as you see that we have our presenters, they are still students right now. They can present and publish papers freely, not expecting only faculty or doctors.
yeah.
But you've just mentioned the difference between humanities and science. It came to my mind a recent book published by Dr. Abdullah Yusuf Al-Ghanim, التربية والتعليم في التراث العربي. كيف علم القدماء أبنائهم. He focused on that part of the importance of rote learning at the beginning, then building up on critical learning thinking, even in science, based on all the previous Arabic scientists like Ibn Khaldun, for example, or Ibn Sina. We have another question from Ayman Hanfawi, Dr. Ayman Hanfawi. He thank you, Dr. Ahmed, for your that you discussed the limitations of epistemology in the Middle East. What about the advantages? Would you kindly shed light on them?
Yes, I come to Dr. Abdullah Al-Ghanayim first question. That yes, indeed, rote learning is important, as I said, in science. But in the humanities, if you set the standard and the methodology that you only learn by rote, then the student from very early age, whether he is 10 or 11 or 12 years old, he or she will regard that is, I don't want to go any further than that. I want to go, yes, you learn certain facts, but let the teacher encourage the student saying, what do you think of this? As indeed we do say in our teaching, say, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? And that is will open the mind gradually. It's not a political, but it's educational. That when I say the knowledge is, then you begin to say, all right, yes, I want to go to the library, to this book, to tell me something about this subject or that subject, to pursue it any further. So yes, sciences, and it's very important to learn by rote, that's no question. But I'm thinking that in the humanities, a system needs to be open. People think of it that it is a critique of the political or the religious establishment. It isn't that way. In a sense, people have faith in religion, have faith in their political stuff, yet, but their mind, when you come to education, it may open their mind, but it doesn't mean they become rebellious against religion or politics.
Sure.
Yeah, sorry, the second question, he said,
From Dr. Ayman Hanfawi, he would like you to shed some light on the advantages of the...
Yes. There is a lot of potentialities, and these potentialities, I'm really coming to, for example, I'm soon in May, I'm going to have a very large conference by younger generation of Sudanese and South Sudanese who are trained in various professions, medicine, law, education, geology, having knows chemistry, coming to tell us about their own contribution to the future of their countries. Of course, there are a lot of potentialities, but these, unfortunately, hitherto, are either they are living in the West, they are not back at home because they cannot cope with home. Take, for example, a conference, you were not there, where I had younger women, Sudanese women in Oxford, talking about their contribution. And one of them was involved into, she was head of IT company. And she talked about, her contribution to British society in terms of IT. And the Sudanese ambassador was sitting in the front, so he raised his hand. And I said, yes, Your Excellency. Then he began to thank her, which is very nice, and appreciate her contribution. And then unfortunately, he said, why don't you go back to Sudan? She retorted back, literally, she said, Your Excellency, I earn £70,000 sterling a year, and I am head of a company. Will you give me these privileges when I go back? And that's in answer is that there are potentialities, but they are not appreciated back at home and to be given a proper place in society.
I remember that.
I
remember that. Yeah. So we have a comment, I will read that from Talar Agupian. I have studied in the Middle East and have experienced everything you said. I currently teach at university in Europe. I teach educational psychology, and in my discussions with my students about 21st century learning, many of them who have studied in schools in Europe say the methods were traditional, with the teacher being the main authority and students not being given the chance to think on their own and voice their opinions. It is interesting to see the similarity. So there are similarities, she said, even between here and there, even in Europe, based on her.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not saying that is only a deficiency in the Middle East, but also in the West. But the question here is that continuously you hear, I mean, as indeed in Oxford, you get all these continuous proposition, how to change policies, how to improve things, and I think that is very important, that there is this dynamism into the educational policy that is not static. No, you cannot, because the Minister of Education or the head of the XYZ will not accept this. No, here is a dialogue, is a discussion of what being proposed. Is it really good for the student? Is it good for the faculty? Is it good for the university or to the country? So there's these processes of dialogue, and to improve things, by the way, is very important in any educational system, I think.
There is another question from Eleanor Burton. How do we address the behavior? How do we address the behavior shift that we need within a system where critical thinking and questioning is experienced by educators as potentially threatening the religious, traditional, and nationalist norms, even in the private schools, which try to import best practices for innovative user-centric models? This can only work if the students have the freedom to think, assess their opinions, and question in a safe space. It seems that the social cultural norms are root causes to some of the issues we are facing. Also, fear of failure makes it difficult to mentor university students on research, as failure is not perceived as an acceptable learning opportunity.
Excellent question. You experience, Ahoud, you sit in lunch at St. Anthony's, no staff talking, I am a conservative, I'm a Labour or liberal, right? Nobody. But when they talk is about, what Russia, what China, this and doing educationally, in a sense, your politics is a personal. It should not interfere in your education, in your delivering knowledge to other people. You should not color the knowledge you part with to students because of your political affiliation. No, that's not accepted.
Sure, I agree, but still, Dr. Ahmed, it depends on the country's political system.
Yes, I'm just coming about that.
It's a tool. Education system is a tool of a government.
Yeah.
We can up with a comment or question from...
Can I just finish, Ahoud? Sorry, I haven't finished. I agree with you.
Sorry, please.
Yeah, I haven't finished that. So I'm saying in the West, there is no interference from the political into the system of education. Sure. I agree in certain countries that there is what I call, and I earlier said, prescribed system of education. And that is a problem. When you have prescription, then you cannot say otherwise. Okay. That is the problem.
I agree.
Any question? Yes.
Haifa Jaffer, conferences led by students is a great idea. GCES can play a role in this by having a section for emerging scholars from the Middle East. Actually, Haifa, we have lots of our presenters in this conference are still PhD students and master students and research fellows. They're not faculty. So we are opening, giving them the opportunity even to participate in that conference. Shouldn't be the whole conference organized by students, but they can participate with faculty members. I think this would add value to their discussions. What do you think, Dr. Ahmed?
Why not? I am all for it. We have to listen to the young. I listen to the young. It's very important to I mean, yesterday for 4 hours, I have been listening to the young about the economic, about banking, about land, about conflict, are listening to the young and say, yes, they have an opinion, but those youngsters who thought very hard about what they are doing is, unfortunately, they are not wanted by the higher authorities, because the higher authority see them as a challenge. They want to replace them in terms of authority, or to replace them in position. Not at all. I think we learn from them, and this continuous generation after they contribute, and off they go, and it got replaced. And therefore, it is very important to learn. And this is when I said, since the medieval time, the system of education traditionally got static. That's it. I think I have attended some of the educational institution, traditional one in Sudan, listening to teachers and things. And they say, well, I didn't want to say to the teacher in front of the student, say, look, that's not the way to teach them. It's not for me to do so. But I was absolutely astonished in the kind of way, using not exactly physical, sometimes they use physical force, but this total silence. And if you're trying to open your mouth and you say, well, actually, Ustad, I think this and that, you say, well, shut up, sit down. So this clamming on students who may have some point to make, and this is where conferences, the younger generation make points which are important for us to listen to. And if you have a organized one, for example, Ahoud, on how students receive knowledge and what can they make of this knowledge and how they could improve knowledge, is an excellent exercise.
Yes, true. I really believe in empowering young scholars and young population to participate, and because we learn from them as well as they learn from us. I think we have to wrap up now, Dr. Ahmed. Thank you very much for your time and the great presentation. We already exceeded our time with a few minutes, but
sorry.
We're happy to listen. No worries, it's a break now for a few minutes. That's why I allowed the time. Sorry for the participants that we couldn't answer their questions because they came in late, but I can forward the questions to you if you want to, Dr.
Yeah, please do. Yes, I could answer them by email. But I enjoyed all the questions, and I thank all the questioners, please, those who answer a question, for their really valuable question and contribution to what I know. And it's opened the mind. That's what we are here for. And thank you, Ahoud, for giving me the opportunity to say.
No worries, thank you. Always welcome, Dr. Ahmed. Thanks to you for welcoming us at our GCES 2021. And we have to say goodbye right now and leave the.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. To everybody. Many thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.